Origins of the American Government, Political Heritage and Fundamental Concepts. The United States has a tremendous English political heritage. It begins with the Magna Carta, or Great Charter. Signed by King John in 1215, the Magna Carta guaranteed the principle of limited government, the idea that the king could not do whatever he wanted and had to work with an elected assembly called Parliament. The Magna Carta also provided protection against loss of life, liberty, and property without due process, otherwise known as a fair trial. The rights guaranteed by the Magna Carta only applied to England's nobility, but the institution of Parliament, England's lawmaking body, was a vital step along the road to representative government. The Petition of Right was a document signed by Charles I in 1628 that limited the king's power. Under the Petition of Right, the king could not collect taxes without the permission of Parliament, and he was not allowed to force people to house troops or allowed to imprison them without just cause. The English Bill of Rights was signed by King William III in 1688. It did several things. First, it said the monarch ruled with the consent or permission of Parliament. Second, the English Bill of Rights said the monarch had to get permission from Parliament to do anything related to taxes. Third, the monarch could not interfere with the workings of Parliament. Fourth, people have the right to petition the government and receive a fair trial by a jury of their peers. Fifth, people were protected from cruel and unusual punishment. Part of our English political heritage is the idea of representative government, a government in which people elect delegates or representatives to make laws and conduct government. English political philosophers, such as John Locke, contributed ideas in the 1600s about how government should work, ideas such as the social contract, which says there is an agreement between the people and the government. Government in the American colonies in the 16 and 1700s was generally based on a written constitution, such as the Fundamental Orders of Connecticut, and featured elected assemblies, such as the Virginia House of Burgesses. They also featured the idea of separation of powers, the concept that the powers of government should be divided between different groups, such as assemblies and governors and courts. Virginia's House of Burgesses was the first colonial assembly in the English colonies. Soon, almost all of the 13 colonies had similar representative bodies. In New England, town meetings were the basic unit of colonial government. All male citizens in the town had a voice and a vote. In the 1760s, the British government began taking away some of the protected rights of the colonists, including adding extra taxes on the colonists to increase revenue, or money a government brings in, without asking the colonists' permission first. The colonists responded with an embargo, an agreement prohibiting trade, and protests that quickly escalated into a full-out war. The American colonies fought against what they saw as oppressive British policies and won their independence by 1783. During the war that became known as the American Revolution, an organization called the Second Continental Congress governed the United States. This is the group that had Thomas Jefferson draft the Declaration of Independence in July of 1776 to list grievances against the British. Jefferson cited several ways in which the British government ignored the rights of its subjects in the colonies, including many rights listed in things such as the Magna Carta, the Petition of Right, and the English Bill of Rights. The Declaration of Independence was a document built on 500 years of English political heritage and the philosophy of men like John Locke. It listed the ways in which the British government had ignored the rights of the colonists and how this gave the colonies the right, the responsibility even, to break away and form a new government that would respect the social contract. As the United States moved towards independence, it created its first official government, the Articles of Confederation. The Articles of Confederation was ratified or approved in 1781, while the war was still going on. Under the Articles, the U.S. government had a unicameral or one-chamber legislature. Each state could send as many representatives to this legislature as they wanted, but each state only got one vote. Representatives were chosen by state legislatures, and there was no federal court system under the Articles. The Articles government had a list of basic powers. 1. It could make war and peace. 2. It could send and receive ambassadors with foreign countries. 3rd, it could make treaties with other countries. 4th, it could create and maintain a navy. 5th, it could request troops from the states for an army. 6th, it could appoint senior military officers. 7th, it could set standards of weights and measures. 8th, it could regulate Indian affairs. 9th, it could establish post offices. And finally, 10th, it could decide certain disputes between the states. This is not to say the Articles of Confederation were without weakness. For instance, under the Articles of Confederation, the federal Congress could not collect taxes. The only source of revenue for the federal government was to borrow money from the states, if the states chose to loan it. Second, Congress could not regulate trade between the states or between the states and foreign countries. Third, there was no executive branch to the federal government, so they had no way to enforce its laws. Fourth, in order to pass a law in the Articles Congress, you needed the approval of 9 out of 13 states. Fifth, if you wanted to make a change to the Articles of Confederation, all 13 states had to approve that change. Sixth, as mentioned, there was no executive branch to enforce the laws. And seventh, there was no national court system. In many ways, the Articles of Confederation made it impossible for the national government to actually govern. It had no way to control the states or enforce its own laws. This isn't to say the Articles of Confederation Congress did not achieve anything. They did pass several ordinances or laws. One of the most important was the Ordinance of 1785. Under this law, states ceded or gave up or yielded western territory between the Appalachian Mountains and the Mississippi River to the central government. The government then surveyed and divided that land into smaller territories for settlement. The Ordinance of 1785 divided up the western land into discrete territories, each of which were subdivided into smaller townships to ensure that the territory was settled in an organized, planned manner. Another important law passed by the Articles Congress was the Northwest Ordinance. Passed in 1787, the Northwest Ordinance set up the method for a territory to eventually become a state, a method that was used even after the Articles of Confederation was done away with. The Articles Congress was also responsible for signing the peace treaty with Great Britain that ended the American Revolution in 1783. So in addition to creating the Northwest Territory, the Northwest Ordinance established the process by which a territory could become a state, a process that was used even after the Articles of Confederation were abandoned for the Constitution. Following the Revolution, the United States faced serious financial problems. The central government itself was in tremendous debt, as were all 13 states. Shays' Rebellion, an attack on the Massachusetts state government and on a federal arsenal in Springfield, Massachusetts, led by Daniel Shays in 1787, only further exacerbated the problems. Shays was angry about the financial troubles and about the fact that the state wasn't helping its farmers. Shays' Rebellion proved to many people that the Articles of Confederation were too weak to protect the American people. It needed to be replaced by something with a stronger central government that had more authority to act. In 1786, a meeting was called the Annapolis Convention. Its purpose was to discuss commerce or trade, but only 5 states ended up sending delegates to this convention. Two of the delegates, Alexander Hamilton and James Madison, proposed a second convention in 1787 in Philadelphia to discuss possible changes to the Articles to allow a central government to regulate trade and make the government more effective. In between the Annapolis Convention and this proposed Philadelphia Convention, Shays' Rebellion occurred, only further proving the need for a stronger central government. Alexander Hamilton is one of the few individuals seen as a founding father who was never elected president. James Madison, on the right, is considered the father of the Constitution and served as the fourth president of the United States. The Constitutional Convention met in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania in May of 1787. All 13 states sent delegates to this convention except Rhode Island. 74 delegates were appointed, 55 of them actually showed up, and of those 55, 39 eventually signed the new Constitution. George Washington was unanimously chosen by those present to preside over the convention. James Madison was the Virginia delegate who masterminded the plan that would eventually become the Constitution, and as such he is called the father of the Constitution. The Constitutional Convention met in secret in Philadelphia throughout the summer of 1787, eventually coming up with a plan of government that we still use today. The rules of the convention were simple. Each state got one vote on all issues in the convention. A simple majority vote would decide each issue. Delegates from at least 7 of the 13 states had to be present for a vote to take place. The original plan, as stated, was to simply amend or change the Articles of Confederation, but it quickly became clear that that was not the case. The Virginia plan, which was written by James Madison and proposed by Edmund Randolph, was presented as an alternative to the Articles of Confederation. It featured a 2-chamber legislature with representation in both chambers based on population of the state, and a strong national executive and a national court system. The Virginia plan favored states with large state populations. Many of the smaller states objected to the Virginia plan and were given an opportunity to come up with their own alternative. The New Jersey plan was proposed by William Paterson. It kept the unicameral legislature of the Articles of Confederation and the 1 vote per state rule with that. It added the power to create and collect taxes and regulate trade, and a weak executive committee chosen by Congress. The New Jersey plan favored states with smaller populations. Edmund Randolph, on the left, would go on to serve as the first Attorney General for the United States and the second Secretary of State. William Paterson, on the right, went on to serve as an Associate Justice of the U.S. Supreme Court. Eventually, the delegates decided to create a new plan of government following the Virginia plan and adapting some elements from the New Jersey plan. One of the most difficult decisions was how to determine representation. The Connecticut Compromise, developed by Roger Sherman, addressed that issue of representation. He decided that representation in the lower house, called the House of Representatives, would be determined by a state's population, which would favor the larger states. But in the upper house, or the Senate, each state would get 2 senators, regardless of the state's population, favoring the smaller states. Sherman's Connecticut Compromise, also referred to as the Great Compromise, made it possible to merge the 2 plans into a single, coherent plan for government. Without the Connecticut Compromise, the Constitution would not have been completed. The delegates made other compromises in creating the Constitution. For example, the 3/5 Compromise, which said that slaves would count as 3/5 of a person for representation and taxation purposes. The convention also gave Congress the power to regulate interstate commerce, or trade between the states, as well as trade with foreign countries. In order for the Constitution to take effect, it had to be ratified by at least 9 of the 13 states. many people argued over whether or not they should ratify the Constitution. Federalists were individuals in favor of the new Constitution and a strong federal government. The Federalists argued that the country would suffer from anarchy or political disorder without a strong federal government. Individuals such as Alexander Hamilton and James Madison wrote impassioned essays in newspapers encouraging people to vote in favor of ratification. On the opposing side were the Anti-Federalists, individuals who were against the new Constitution. The Anti-Federalists were not as united in their cause as the Federalists were. Some felt the Constitution was extra-legal, or not sanctioned or allowed by the law, because it had been created in secret and without authorization. But others simply argued that the Constitution lacked a Bill of Rights, and that if a Bill of Rights were added guaranteeing basic freedoms and rights, the new Constitution would not be objectionable. Constitution's position as the new government. The new Constitution's states began to ratify the new Constitution, with Delaware being the first and New Hampshire being the ninth to ratify the Constitution in early 1788. New Hampshire was followed by two of the